Hey, welcome back to Cloud and Sec. In this video, I'm talking about the strategic cybersecurity news released on July 2023. This month has been really packed with AI security related news, plus some new cybersecurity reports from IBM that gained the headlines, plus some new announcements from Microsoft as well around some products and some offerings. So let's take the time to dive into these pieces of news. And as always, you'll be able to find all of these pieces of news and all the sources in my blog post in the description. Let's dive in. As usual, I always like to kick off by reiterating that you can find it all in my blog post here. Right? So everything I'm talking about is discussed in details here. But I want to take the time to actually take you through each one of the news, right? So the first one that I want to take you through here is a new way that Security, a cybersecurity company, has found to attack users who are leveraging open large language models coming from a model hub such as Hugging Face, for example, are exposed to a supply chain attack, which Mitro is dubbing PoisonGPT. Essentially, they created their own model with misinformation and fake information in it, and they loaded that model into this model hub. This is essentially a proof of concept to reiterate the importance of verifying your supply chain, verifying who you're bringing your models from. Essentially, what they did is upload their own data set from this model and to leverage a typo squatting model of misunderstanding from the users who are searching for a specific model. So what they were doing is they were uploading that model under the name of eLooter, for example, right? So there is an official model called eLooter AI with an H into it. But what they did is they created a similarly looking called eLooter without the H. So there we go. So you can see that they specify that they just removed the H from the name. So it's a supply chain attack to these models relying on open source and open model hubs that relies on typo squatting and the users not verifying what model they're downloading. But essentially and they verify that users have consumed their own fake information hub throughout that period of time in which they ran this. But whoever downloaded that erroneously was consuming wrong information. So potentially there could be implications here if people are, and the risk here is really a supply chain attack or supply chain like attack versus these model hub and models being sent to it loaded with whatever information whoever uploads them has access to or intent to use that information. So be mindful where you use your models from. But for anyone else leveraging the regular chatbots from OpenAI or even Bard and even other models such as Claude from Anthropic, you would think that the guardrails would secure your users from misusing the platform, from attempting to get harmful content and harmful responses out of it. So we know as a matter of fact that there are in fact a number of guardrails already imposed into these platforms to safeguard users and safeguard the platform from responding with harmful content. And there have been people who have tried to jailbreak these prompts in many different ways. What's being reported here by New York Times, though, is how some researchers have actually found a way to poke holes through these guardrails and safeguards from these very prominent GPT models. So think of, in other chatbots, right? So think of a way that people could essentially get whatever results they want out of them, even if they are harmful. Now, I will leave the link to the New York Times article for you in the blog post, naturally, but what I would like to highlight is the official research from the researchers is available online. They're from Carnegie University Center for AI Security and Bosch Center, as you can see here. And the focus of the research was really to look beyond the methods that people have been trying to jailbreak the prompt engineering there on these formats. If I zoom in here into this highlighted text, you can see what they attempted to demonstrate into the research, which is they want to demonstrate that it is in fact possible to automatically construct adversarial attacks on LLMs, large language models, specifically chosen sequences of characters that, when appended to a user query, will cause the system to obey user commands, even if it produces harmful content. This is a very interesting result from their research, one that they go on into exemplifying a little bit later here on the research. I would advise you to have a look into this for more details on how they achieved it and what this research actually looks like. So very interesting way that these researchers have found how to essentially break into or get more answers out of these large language models. So another form of attack, if you will, to the intended usage of these LLMs. Next, I want to cover a threat report, or rather a cybersecurity report from IBM that was released. So, and this here is a great kind of release that we get from the big IBM, right? So what that means is essentially this is the 2023 cost of breach report. And it contains a handful of very interesting information regarding the spend of cybersecurity companies throughout a period of time here, how much on average data breaches have cost organizations. So you can see here that the global average cost of data breach reached $4.45 million in 2023, which has been an increase 15% over the last 3 years. Detection and escalation costs have also increased, and there have been also a number of other interesting findings. I want to highlight here a few of them. First and foremost, the matter of the fact here, we're talking a lot about AI, but how has AI developed according to this report? There's actually been substantial here impact, as you can see here. So AI and automation had the biggest impact on speed of breach identification and containment for stated organizations. And we have been seeing AI actually be used this way for a lot of organizations, and in fact, an important part of our tooling when we are dealing with incidents and management of threats in our environments. So organizations with extensive use of both AI and automation experienced a data breach lifecycle was 108 days shorter compared to studied organizations that have not deployed these technologies. Very interesting facts, right? They also have this interesting information here on the ransomware victims. So they have found that victims that involved law enforcement saved almost $500,000 in average cost of breach compared to those that did not involve law enforcement. So that is an interesting fact here. So unfortunately, I don't get here the details on why these, what motives were underneath these all, but very interesting fact, right? This particular information here is also very important, right? So how breaches have been disclosed. We oftentimes might think that it will either be disclosed by attackers or internal teams who have found them. But in fact, the report here found that only 1 in 3 studied breaches were detected by the organization's own security teams or tools. 27% of such breaches were disclosed by an attacker, and 40% were disclosed by a neutral third party, such as a law enforcement. So the 3 possible ways that breaches can be disclosed are effectively pretty much even in how they happen, but mostly done by law enforcement Just kind of interesting. And lastly, these couple ones here I want to highlight. The cost of healthcare breaches continues to soar. So the average costs of studied breach in healthcare reached nearly $11 million in 2023. So a steep 50% price increase since 2022. And lastly, the last piece of highlight that I want to point out from this report is this DevSecOps advantage, right? So according to the research here, study organizations across all industries with a high level of DevSecOps saw a global average cost of data breach nearly 1.7 million lower than those studied with a low level, no use of DevSecOps approach. Therefore, organizations who make use of DevSecOps are better prepared and will likely face lower cost of breach down the line. Again, no information here on the actual reasons behind all of that. More detailed research would be needed for each one of these highlights that I mentioned, but a great resource here with a great track record from IBM from this report. Moving on to the next piece of news, it's about AI security. But this time around, I'm talking about a model that is actually responding to anything by default. So just today, we were just talking about how researchers have found out how to append a piece of string that will allow these mainstream chatbots to respond with anything. We actually have available here a specifically tailored GPT called WarmGPT for these unhinged or unfiltered responses. So whatever people throw at it in terms of requests, it'll spit out, right, a response. So we often see hackers or essentially black hats attempting to use these models to create malicious code content that will potentially be worms or malware in some way, shape, or form, but they can also create content specifically crafted to deploy an early stage malware, for example, for initial access with a specifically crafted email compromise, for example, an email to fool someone into clicking something, or even later down the line, communications created by this platform. Anything goes for this platform. Now, I will leave the link to this slash next article here, which is great because it goes through some of the pages of what that can potentially look like, the WarmGPT. And what is really important here for us to see is what darknet forums would look like in terms of how people are propagating WarmGPT. So it's an easy money attempt here for cyber criminals. And then there is a quick example here of what this would look like for someone attempting to create a business email, compromise email to a CEO. So just something else for you to be aware. So this is a SaaS service, right? Essentially. So people would, however, they would gain access to this platform that will be an unfiltered version GPT, specifically tailored and crafted for malicious use, if you will. There is a second report as well about this as well. This is from AI Infotech. I've never heard of this source before, but it does contain quite an interesting list of information here about WarmGPT, such as what's different from this model versus other ones. The main thing from my perspective is really that unfiltered capability, but there's more things that they list out. Unlimited text generation. Essentially, rely on that unfiltered capabilities for whatever resource or response you want to get. They then list out other capabilities that are very similar to what we already get with other chatbots based on generative. But they do mention here that one of the capabilities here is anonymity and availability. Right? So they call out that WarmGPT can be accessed anonymously, which raises concerns regarding accountability and the potential misuse of the tool. As you know, if you log into Bard or even OpenAI's ChatGPT, you have to have an account, so everything you do is accounted for someone or some account. So that is a safeguard measure that oftentimes platforms operate with. So this here doesn't have any of that. So yet another red flag for all of us to be aware of when we are on the front lines defending against this sort of attacks. or attacks crafted by these tools, right? So for the next piece of news, it's some simplified pricing method for Microsoft Sentinel. This is the official blog post which Microsoft explained how this simplified pricing works for Sentinel. Essentially, they're merging the Microsoft Sentinel price and the log analytics prices for whatever workspace you have with Sentinel. So instead of having to control both costs concurrently, what you get is one single price for both capabilities there. And so there are a few benefits from doing this. Essentially, you can still use your Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2, benefit of 500 megabytes per virtual machine, free data for a specific security database in log analytics. That still works for this in this new model. Free trials also have had a slight change here, so they'll be worth for 31 days. They can ingest up to 10 gigabytes of data per day in Sentinel and log analytics. The Azure pricing calculator has been updated to fill in with this new model, and that's very important because every new customer spinning up new Sentinel instances will be part of this new combined simplified model already. Okay, now there are a few caveats if you are already a Sentinel customer. So if you already have Sentinel, you have the option to enroll into this new model. And as you can see here on the screenshot, you'll be shown here a box here at the top, which essentially shows you a way to switch to the new pricing model. That's a one-way operation there. And if you do not want to migrate, you are not mandated to migrate as of today. So that's pretty good news. It's an optional move. There are a few frequently asked questions here at the bottom of this article, and I'll leave the article here for your reference as well. So good news for Sentinel customers who are looking for a simplified pricing method. Next up, and the last piece of news for this month, is really about Microsoft new identity and access management capabilities. So a couple of news here that were announced early July. Microsoft has rebranded Azure Active Directory. As you can see here, Azure Active Directory, which has been a staple into the Azure service offering for many years now, is now being rebranded to Microsoft Entra ID. Same capabilities, same feature sets, same way that it's being sold. So nothing changes. It's just the name, really. So that's the first piece of news from this article here. But they've also announced a new set of capabilities to protect access, right? So this is Microsoft's Security Service Edge solution, essentially. And I highly recommend you access this article here so that you have more information about what it encompasses, but it will include a range of capabilities that protect your internet access, your users going to the internet, to SaaS services, not necessarily just for Microsoft 365 services, right? So that's broader than that. But there's also a second offering for private access. And what these are called is essentially two solutions, right? So we think of internet access. Microsoft calls it Microsoft Entra Internet Access, EIA, which is an identity-centric secure web gateway that protects access to internet, software as a service, and Microsoft 365's apps and resources. It extends the conditional access policies with network conditions to protect against malicious internet traffic and other threats from the open internet. So a great solution for these kind of services. The second offering here is Microsoft Entra Private Access, an identity-centric zero-trust network access that secures access to private applications and resources. So essentially protecting users from whatever networks they're trying to come in from, to whatever private applications and resources that you have and must secure with zero trust network access. So a great couple solutions here for you to be aware of. Now, this article also highlights here or summarizes rather, all the different names that have happened and been announced by Microsoft into the Entra family. So be here mindful that Azure Active Directory is now Entra ID, as you can see here. There's now Entra ID governance. There's Entra external ID, and everything within these set of identity protection and identity control within Microsoft portfolio is now called or now found under the Entra umbrella of capabilities. Okay, with this, I'd like to thank your time for this video and watching this video. You've seen that there's a slew of information around AI security and AI security attack methods and attack tools even. So for us to keep up with the pace of innovation and releases on that world is always going to be a challenge, but hopefully this is helping you. Let me know if it does by liking, if not by disliking, and if you do find this content useful, please subscribe. Okay, catch you next time. Thank you.